Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. This is LL3's newest podcast. My name is Craig, and transmitting from the Hoosier State of Miami County, which is also known as Indiana, plus the crossroads of America. Today is Thursday, September 11th, 2014. Yeah, it's a little bit early in the morning, so I'm a little bit mellowed. Trying to do the show when everyone else is asleep. But I'm gonna do a few topics here. And of course, today is a remembrance of the horrific events on September 11th, 2001. So you should always even look at what happened in 1973. That occurred in Chile, and I will try to add it to the footnotes as soon as I can. And that's actually was something to do with Harry Kissinger didn't like people didn't want to play ball with him, so it was a big coup attempt on that time. But I will put that in my footnotes on that as extra. I don't have to address it big time, but I'll try to add that in there to my Spreaker page, okay? Well, first thing we're going to talk about, most likely, is about September 11th, and this was written by Paul Craig Roberts, and it's entitled 9/11 After 13 Years. And it was actually posted September 10th, to be exactly the same year. And as it reads, the tragedy of September 11, 2001 goes far beyond the deaths of those who died in the towers and the deaths of firefighters and first responders who succumbed to illnesses caused by inhalation of toxic dust. For 13 years, a new generation of Americans has been born into the 9/11 myth that it has been used to create the American warfare/police state. The corrupt Bush and Obama regimes used 9/11 to kill, maim, dispossess, and displace millions of Muslims in 7 countries, none of whom had anything whatsoever to do with 9/11. A generation of Americans has been born to disdain and distrust of Muslims. A generation of Americans has been born into a police state which privacy and constitutional protections no longer exist. A generation of Americans has been born into continuous warfare while needs of citizens go unmet. A generation of Americans has been born into a society in which truth is replaced with endless repetition of falsehoods. According to the official story on September 11, 2001, the vaunted national security state of the world's only superpower was defeated by a few young Saudi Arabians armed only with box cutters. The American national security state proved to be totally helpless and was dealt the greatest humiliation ever inflicted on any country claiming to be a power. That day, no aspect of the national security state worked. Everything failed. The U.S. Air Force, for the first time in its history, could not get interceptor jet fighters into the air. The National Security Council failed. All 16 U.S. intelligence agencies failed, as did those of America's NATO Israeli allies. Air traffic control failed. Airport security failed 4 times at the same moment on the same day. The probability of such a failure is 0. If such a thing had actually happened, there would have been demands from the White House, from Congress, and from the media for an investigation. Officials would have been held accountable for their failures. Heads would have rolled. Instead, the White House resisted for 1 year the 9/11 family's demands for an investigation. Finally, a collection of politicians was assembled to listen to the government's account and to write it down. the chairman, vice chairman, and legal counsel of the 9/11 Commission, said that information was held from the Commission, lies were told to the Commission, and that the Commission was set up to fail. The worst security failure in history resulted in not a single firing. No one was held responsible. Washington concluded that 9/11 was possible because America lacked a police state. The Patriot Act, which was awaiting the event, was quickly passed by congressional idiots. The act established executive branch independence of law and the Constitution. The act and follow-up measures have been institutionalized a police state in land of the free. Osama bin Laden, a CIA asset dying of renal failure, was blamed despite his explicit denial. For the next 10 years, Osama bin Laden was the boogeyman that provided the excuse for Washington to kill countless numbers of Muslims. Then suddenly, on May 2nd, 2011, Obama claimed that U.S. Navy SEALs had killed bin Laden in Pakistan. Eyewitnesses on the scene contradicted the White House's story. Osama bin Laden became the only human in history to survive renal failure for 10 years. There was no dialysis machine, and that was said to be in bin Laden's hideaway. The numerous obituaries of bin Laden's death in December 2001 went down the memory hole, and the SEAL team died a few weeks later in a mysterious helicopter crash in Afghanistan. The thousands of sailors on the aircraft carrier from which bin Laden was said to have been dumped into the Indian Ocean wrote home that no such burial took place. The fairy tale story of bin Laden's murder by SEAL Team 6 served to the end the challenge, the disappointment Democrats to Obama's nomination for a second term. It also freed the war on terror from the bin Laden constraint. Washington wanted to attack Libya, Syria, and Iran, countries in which bin Laden was known not to have organizations, and a succession of fake bin Laden videos in which bin Laden grew progressively younger. As a fake bin Laden claimed credit for each successive attack, had lost credibility among experts. Watching the Twin Towers and the BTC-7 come down, it was obvious to me that the buildings were not falling down as a result of structural damage. When it became clear that the White House had blocked an independent investigation of the only 3 steel skyscrapers in world history to collapse as a result of a low-temperature office fires, it was apparent that there was a cover-up. After 13 years, people at home and abroad find the government story less believable. The case made by independent experts is now compelling that mainstream media has opened to it here. Here is Richard Gage of Architects Engineers for 9/11 Truth on C-SPAN, which is linked on there for YouTube, just to let you guys know. And I've seen it. So it's 40 minutes long, like 43 minutes long. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. After years of persistence, a group in New York has secured the necessary number of valid signatures to put on the ballot to vote to investigate the cause of the collapse of the 3 WTC buildings. The official count, if correct, means that existing fire and building codes are insufficient to protect the public, and that all other steel high-rise structures are subject to the same failure. The group has been clever to frame the issue in terms of public safety and not in terms of 9/11 truth. That was very strategic. New York authorities, of course, continue to oppose the initiative. The question is now rests on a judge's ruling. It is difficult to imagine a judge going against the government in such a major way, but the group will have made the point that the government has no confidence in the truth of its own story. Over these 13 years, physicists, chemists, architects, engineers, and first responders have provided massive evidence that completely disproves the official count that is, of the failure of the 3 skyscrapers. The response to experts has been for non-experts to call experts conspiracy theorists. In other words, the defenders of the government story have no scientific or factual basis on which to stand. So they substitute name-calling. 9/11 was used to fundamentally alter the nature of the U.S. government and its relationship to the American people. Unaccountable executive power has replaced due process and the checks and balances established by the U.S. Constitution. And the name of national security, executive power, knows no restraints. Essentially, Americans today have no rights if the government targets them. Those Americans born after 9/11 were born into a different country from the rest of us. Having never experienced constitutional government, they will not know what they have lost. The anthrax attacks of October 2001 have been forgotten, but Professor Grameen McQueen in the 2001 Anthrax Deception, which is released on Clarity Press this year, 2014, shows that the anthrax attacks plays an essential role in setting the stage for government's acquisition of governmental police state power. 2 Democratic Senate Committee Chairmen, Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy, were disturbed by the Bush regime's overreach for carte blanche power, and were in a position to block the coming police state legislation and the ability of the executive branch alone to take America to war. Both senators received anthrax letters, as did major news organizations. The TV network anchors such as Dan Rather, who compared the collapse of WTC skyscrapers to the buildings brought down by controlled demolition, had not yet been fired by Republicans on framed-up charges. Initially, the anthrax letters, which caused the deaths of some United States Postal Service employees, which is acronym USPS, were seen as the second stage of the 9/11 attack. Fear multiplied. The senator and media shut up. Then it was discovered that the anthrax was a unique kind produced only by a governmental military facility. The response to this monkey wrench thrown into government's propaganda was the FBI's frame-up of a dead man. Bruce Edwards Ivins who had been employed in the military lab that produced the anthrax and was driven to suicide by the false charges. The dead man's colleagues did not believe one word of the government's false story, and nothing in the dead man's past indicated any motive or instability that would have been led to such a deed. Initially, the U.S. government tried to frame up Stephen J. Hatfield, but despite the best efforts of the New York Times and Nicholas Kristof, the attempt to frame Hatfield failed. Hatfield received $5 million from the U.S. government for the false accusation that ruined his life. So the corrupt U.S. government moved on to Ivins. Ivins was dead and couldn't defend himself, but his colleagues did. The entire episode stinks to high heaven. Justice is something that exists outside the borders of the United States. Never expect to find justice within the United States. Most Americans are unaware of the extent to which the federal government owns the experts who can contradict its fairy tales. For example, no competent physicist can possibly believe the official story of destruction of the 3 WTC buildings, but physicist departments in the U.S. universities are heavily dependent on federal money. Any physicist who speaks his mind jeopardizes not only his own career, but also the career of all of his colleagues. Physicist Stephen Jones, who first pointed to the use of thermite in the destruction of the 2 towers, had to agree to having his university buy out his tenure, or his university was faced with losing all federal financing. The same constraints operated in the private sector. High-rise architects and structural engineers who expressed doubts about the official explanation of the collapse of the 3 skyscrapers are viewed by potential clients as Muslim apologists and conspiracy kooks. The clients, of course, have no expert knowledge with which to assess the issue, but they are indoctrinated with ceaseless, endless repetition that 9/11 was Osama bin Laden's attack on America. Their indoctrination, makes them immune to facts. The 9/11 lie has persisted for 13 years. Millions of Muslims have paid for this lies, with their lives, the destruction of their families, and their dislocation. Most Americans remain comfortable with the fact that the government had destroyed in whole or part of 7 countries based on a lie Washington told, a cover-up, an inside job that launched the crazed neoconservatives' drive for Washington's world empire. And there's even an extra link over here too that was done by Global Research about the no airliner black box found at the World Trade Center. But you know what? I want to do my little commentary on the Paul Craig Roberts first. So I'm going to add this to the memo. And I'll be very honest. I was sleeping when all this occurred. Then around 10:35, I got a phone call from my mom. She left a message and told me what happened. When I observed the trade centers, especially the 2 buildings, 1 and 2. And when it came down, you call it a collapse. I saw it was dusted. When it came away, it just came down. And what was funny, the first building that collapsed from the 2, the second plane hit it. It was the second plane that hit that one building. I think it was south end. I think it was the south end. I could be mistaken. But the first one hit, of course, 8:45 Eastern Daylight Time. The second one hit around at 9 o'clock, 9:15. I could be, correct me too if you want. But when the second plane hit the other building, that first came down. And what really got me was how it just came down pretty damn straight. And you could say it was dusted as well. I had to question it immediately. I took the initiative. I'm looking at some of the books I got. If I'm correct, it was Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper, and I was analyzing Biggest Secret by David Icke. Doesn't matter what you think, but the information was very interesting. And of course I knew about conspiracies in the past as well. Kennedy assassinations, I questioned Oklahoma City because they were scapegoating the state militias. The biggest mistake, those sons of bitches, and I say that politely, was trying to drill in everyone's head. They attacked us because of our freedoms or how we live. They took advantage of our free society. Those sentences and rhetoric was the biggest error they made. If they attacked us because they took advantage of our freedoms, could you explain why the airplanes, not just with the World Trade Center, but with the Pentagon and the one that crashed in Pennsylvania? Explain to me why the Federal Aviation Administration deprived the airline industries on their Second Amendment rights. The airplanes were in a self-defense or firearm-free zone. How come they'll never let the airline industry make that decision? But it was done by federal bureaucrats. Second, the so-called South Florida connection. And they claim to be Muslims. I know for a fact, and anyone who is a Muslim could send me information on this as well. The South Florida connection there was an incident that happened in the Young Circle district of Hollywood, Florida, which is like a little nightlife area, bars and restaurants, etc. There was a place now defunct called Shuckham's. There was a claim that these Muhammad Atta and his cohorts were consuming alcohol big time, getting totally intoxicated, and just babbling what they're going to be doing loudly, allegedly, letting everyone know we're going to hijack the planes and crash them, use them as missiles. Then they threw the book tray on the table. I find that I was like laughing out of infuriation. It was the biggest insult I've heard from the news. I believe from Clicker was Channel 6 News. I recommend everyone I can't put all these footnotes in there, but I recommend type that in, type that in. And of course, third, they talked about a few days later during the week, for the next 3 days, they talked about we gotta have a national ID card, we gotta forfeit our freedom for security, and all that good stuff. Trying to drill it in our heads like a mind control extravaganza. And that's how I see what happened with 9/11. In my heart and soul, I was real convinced it was a New World Order agenda. Regardless how you believe it was done, collapse or demolition, nuclear bombs went off, got dusted. Doesn't matter how it happened. But I could say this: I don't believe the official story. And I know a lot of people this day, it's been getting pretty big now. A lot of people are questioning. So another thing too I could recommend, type in rethink 911.org, which is from Architects and Engineers from 9/11 Truth. They have a video about how did Building 7 came down, because the fact is 3 buildings came down by 2 airplanes. And of course, the rumors and the claims that the Pentagon, it was a missile that hit it, not an actual airplane. So, but regardless, if you believe it or not, don't matter. It's a bigger picture of what it is. I always look at it as a New World Order agenda. The war on terror is a conflict with ourselves, not just in the United States, but around the world. And how come we have the USA Patriot Act, Domestic Security Act, Homeland Security Act, the Real ID Act? Because it's not for our safety. They want us to be in line like a bunch of good little boys and girls and go, okay, boss, yes, master, we will do as you say. But I will say this: we have the 10th Amendment. And the truth of the matter is, 8 states and 400 municipalities around the United States have nullified the USA Patriot Act and the Domestic Security Act. Broward County, Florida is one of them. You can go to Bill of Rights Defense Committee, and they can tell you all about, they have a little thing on the Patriot Act, which is real fantastic. 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution could say, butt out. So, and that's why when all that propaganda and manipulation trying to sell me a bad lemon, like, oh, it's a great, fantastic car, but trying to sell me a bad lemon, I knew in my mind it was a global governance plan. So, and I have admit, and I wrote this too in the blacktuesday.net in the guest book. I believe it went out when I wrote about the United States, people in the United States say they're proud to be united. If you want to do this, you have to honor our Bill of Rights culture, defend it, rather than forfeit for security. And this quote I write right next to it: death to terrorism, corruption, and a new world order, so we can ensure true peace, security, and spiritual prosperity. That was on September 18th, Tuesday, 2001. However, I declared as my signature on Friday, September 14th of the same year. So something to really think about, my friends. And I'm going to read the global research. I could thank Paul Craig Roberts for putting that out on this link. I haven't read it yet. And it's entitled, No Airline Black Boxes Found at the World Trade Center. Senior officials dispute official 9/11 claim. And it was written by, I didn't say anyone, but consensus911.org. Okay, good. It's from New York, to be exact. As disappearing airliners continue to dominate the headlines, the new evidence is surfacing to negate official claims that the black boxes from the 9/11 planes were never found. Let me just make this a little bit bigger, just for the heck of it. Thank you. Firemen working at Ground Zero in October 2001 claimed to have found 3 of the 4 virtuality indestructible boxes. The Telltale flight recorder pinging had an earlier reported by the director of the New York State Emergency Management Office and was confirmed by the radio frequency detectors. This information is presented by the 24-member 9/11 consensus panel, which was used a rigorous medical model to establish this evidence. The panel has produced over a 3-year period 44 peer-reviewed consensus points, refuting official claims concerning the events of September 11, 2001. Although 19 Muslim hijackers allegedly broke into the cockpits and commandeered 4 aircraft on 9/11, none of the 8 pilots squawked the 7500 hijack code. Nor is there any proof that the lost radar signals, which made NORAD interception difficult, resulted because alleged hijackers turned off the cockpit transponders. This lack of proof is compounded by the fact that NORAD's traditional procedures to intercept aircraft that deviated from course or lose radar and radio contact were not followed on 9/11. Strangely, NORAD's Commander-in-Chief, General Ralph Eberhart, has scheduled for the morning of 9/11 an unprecedented number of annual military air drills that involve most of the U.S. Air Force. After being informed of the real-world attacks, Eberhart's bewildering activities and decisions caused critical delays that led to an utterly failed military response. His accounting of these days, published in NORAD's September 18, 2001 timeline, was reserved when he testified before the 9/11 Commission in 2003. Further questions regarding official behavior arise in point MC-10, the activities of the mayor Giuliani on September 11, 2001. Giuliani told Peter Jennings in the morning that while he was in his emergency management team, who were in the building at 75 Barclay Street, where they had set up temporary headquarters after the Twin Towers were struck and had warned that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. Giuliani failed to warn others of this notification, how he knew that the Twin Towers were going to collapse, and why he did not pass on requires intensive investigation under oath. The 9/11 consensus panel joins such people as its honorary members and more recently 30-year career NSA official and whistleblower William Binney in calling for an investigation into 9/11. I do remember hearing that too, footage of Giuliani saying the towers are going to collapse. And how the hell did he knew about it? And now he's denying it and telling people they're crackpots and you don't know what you're talking about. Well, I'm not too surprised at all. The plot is getting thicker. And I did heard William Binney, I was on Alex Jones talking about this as well, about 9/11. So, yeah, it is very disturbing. How come stuff is being hidden and censored, and this is go on. I can just go on this for all this time, but yep. So, truth is coming out, my friends. It's coming out little by little. And like I said, do this for the families that died on this horrific day, the first responders, and all the innocent people around the world, especially in the Middle East. and all of our fellow brothers and sisters that are being detained. This is why I had to add this to my memo, because which I don't regret. So yeah, so like I said, where are the black boxes, right? All right, you know what, next one I'll be doing, add this to the archives here. It's an archive which the JPFO did about 9/11, and this is like 3 days later. It says here, this came out September 14, 2001. A Bill of Rights culture is the only answer. Sorry about that. Black Tuesday and the passive American. A Bill of Rights culture is the only answer. We must give up some of our freedoms to help combat terrorism. The predictable words and actions are the beginning to spew from political, military, and law enforcement officials and their supporters. For safety, for security, for the greater good, they somberly tell us why we must comply with their agendas. To be protected from terrorism, we must submit to more restrictions on our ability to travel, our freedom from arbitrary searches, on the privacy of our communications, on our right to bear arms, on our ability to conduct business hidden from prying eyes of the government. Senator Judd Gregg, Republican from New Hampshire, has called for global prohibition on encryption products without backdoors for government surveillance. Travel regulators have banned knives on plane. Does this mean pilots can't protect themselves and passengers against hijackers? ISPs were reluctant to cooperate with the FBI's invasive carnivore program, now rushing to comply. The Senate has, in the wake of Black Tuesday, voted to increase the FBI's authority to tap phones on anyone suspected of terrorism. As we've seen by all these other random restrictions, we're all suspects in the eyes of the U.S. government. Perhaps more ominously of all, the Washington Post quote House Democrat leader Richard Gephardt as making the self-contradictory but entirely predictable statement: we're in a new world where we have to rebalance freedom and security. We can't take people's civil liberties, but we're not going to have all the openness and freedoms we have had. That's from the Washington Post. That went on to describe how every war and crisis, or the last 100 years, have been used to increase government power, often the most doctrinating way. Freelance supporters of the surveillance state are rushing to urge everyone to comply. One liberal talk show host responded to callers who complained that Big Brother's policies at airports were a problem. Big Brother is the only thing holding us together. He offered no evidence to show how Big Brother made us safe on Tuesday, September 11th. We must think free, not patriotically jerk our knees. Soon, we may be at war, and as always at such times, we'll be expected to pull together, to do what our leaders tell us is necessary, and sacrifice more freedom in the name of safety and security, or patriotism. And as a reality of the day of horror seeps in, one who doesn't feel an urge to strike back, to get behind our government, to show those murdering bastards they can't push Americans around, and to do whatever it takes to defend the great country on earth, even if that means sacrificing individual liberties to the cause. Whatever happens from here and out, we need to remember that Big Brother is not holding us together, that he never can and never will. We must remember that the kind of restrictions on the liberties of ordinary Americans that were entirely ineffective preventing the attacks on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, will not magically prevent future attacks merely because their severity is increased. What did all of Big Brother's efforts do to prevent Tuesday's slaughter, the violations of freedom we've already been subjected to in the same name of safety: airport, x-rays, ID checks, disarmament, body searches, and the whole gamut became a sick joke when the day arrived that we needed them to protect the country against the world's worst criminals. In fact, Daniel Pipes of the Wall Street Journal was quick to point out how government's reliance on mass eavesdroppings and tracking actually diverted resources for more effective anti-terrorism methods, such as actually studying and infiltrating genuine terrorist groups. Yet now, the U.S. government proposed a giant national effort to do more of the same, to impose more ineffective, wasteful, and oppressive mass surveillance and restrictions. The new restrictions on the freedoms of the non-violent people will do nothing to make America or the world safer. They will make us less safe, as well as less free. There are at least two reasons for this. The first is that more restrictions and more power placed in the hands of government will simply, in the long run, create more rage and therefore more desire to strike violently, as we also saw some restrictions like those that forbid armed citizens on planes also make it harder to protect themselves, for Americans to protect themselves and their country. The second is something we observe tragically, though cell phones from four doomed hijacked planes, the fatal passivity and dependence that seem to be becoming the norm in American behavior. The passive, unthinking American. It appears now that a handful of heroic passengers on one flight, having learned via telephone that two other hijacked airplanes and planes had already smashed into the World Trade Center, decided not to allow themselves to be used as weapons of war. These passengers on United Flight 93 attacked the hijackers who were in control of the plane. Doomed in any case, they ended up dying in the woods and fields of rural Pennsylvania rather than passively allowing their captors to get away with an even more horrendous mass murder. We also know that on at least one other flight, American Flight 77, which smashed into the Pentagon, passenger Barbara Olson learned from her husband, U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson, of the World Trade Center catastrophe. During two separate calls, Mrs. Olson, a well-known author and conservative television commentator, asked her husband what the pilot standing next to her in the back of the plane should do. Picture that. The passengers and crew have been herded, and note that word well, herded, to the back of the plane. Even the pilot, the leader, and the chief decision maker does nothing. Can't think what to do, can't act. Instead of attempting to save their own lives and the lives of others on the ground, what do? They expect a federal government official to make the decision for them. The evidence says that these people didn't even feel empowered to defend their own lives without first asking the advice or permission of Washington, D.C. And why should we have expected otherwise? Americans have been told repeatedly never to resist crime, always to submit to any demand a thug makes of them, always go along for safety's sake, go along in order to avoid angering the criminal. We've been told always to submit as well to any demand made by anyone who appears to be in charge. These people on Flight 911 and presumably the other two of the other flights were apparently paralyzed by their conditioning that they couldn't assert themselves, even when an alternative was certain death. Even as pathetically disarmed as they were, they could batter hijackers with their briefcases, their shoes, their purses. They could have overwhelmed them with sheer numbers of bodies. They could have gouged at the eyes with fingers or car keys, could have knocked them unconscious with luggage from overhead racks, could have tripped them, stomped them, tied them up in cords from audio headsets. But expect Except on United Flight 93, they apparently did nothing. And so 3 planes flew, sure and true, into the hearts of 3 American landmarks, slaughtering thousands. The only true security measure, a Bill of Rights culture. We must take back America as a country. We must make it free and independent again. No longer would-be ruler of its own people, and no longer playing at being world's super cop. Only by doing that will earn the world's peace and respect. We must take our own individual lives and independent spirits back from would-be rulers and criminals as well. If we consent passively to give up more freedoms, even temporarily or as an emergency measure, we'll be doing the opposite. We'll be less safe and less free. To restore American freedom and personal courage, we must restore the Bill of Rights in our country, in our hearts and minds. If we understand the Bill of Rights, we'll understand what we're fighting for and why. If we let it slip away, what's left won't be worth fighting for. This means not merely having an intellectual or legal understanding of the Bill of Rights. This means not merely memorizing the Bill of Rights or teaching it to our children. This means understanding the concepts of individual liberty that underlie the Bill of Rights, then living those concepts, breathing them, eating, dreaming them, holding them as much as the most central values of our lives. In the same place we hold our beliefs in our deity and our direction to our families or to truth or justice. We must behave as free people, except encourage others to behave as free people, and have zero tolerance for anyone who abuses freedom or uses his authority to violate the Bill of Rights. If there was a time in history to get behind the Bill of Rights and promote it, it is now. If we yield to this mushy thinking that the road to freedom and safety lies in giving up freedom and the Bill of Rights, then we might as well bow down and defeat right now. If we don't defend our rights, we'll have no rights. If we don't defend ourselves, our families, and our fellow citizens, and defend their freedoms, then our lives will be no more valuable than those of cattle and sheep. In America, we end up and won't be in America we thought we were fighting for. If you want to be a passive herd beast, obey whatever the authority of the moment, be that bureaucrat or hijacker, tells you to do. Listen to their lies about safety and security and obey, obey, obey. But if you truly want to combat terrorism or terror war, learn the Bill of Rights, teach the Bill of Rights, enforce the Bill of Rights with every action of your life. Fight back with the Bill of Rights. That's from the Liberty Crew. And that was, one of them was the late Aaron Zellman. He really involved in writing this information to put his own viewpoints in. I always gotta give him homage. And JPFO is absolutely right. You know, as an archive, always like to read this, share this information to people, because, like Benjamin Franklin says, I'm paraphrasing, if you give up your freedom for temporary security, you deserve nothing or either freedom or security. And another quote from Ben Franklin: what you want this to be the motto for the United States when it first came out. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. So that will be in my part of that memo, the whole 9/11 aspect chapter. And I'm going to hit this next one here. This is from the Survival. It got spread on the Blaze and opposing views. So Chris Franks wrote this on September 9th, 2014. And this says here, a Florida small business owner said Monday the city of Ocala has threatened to fine him if he does not immediately take down his Gadsden flag currently displayed outside his store. Gear Barrel owner Keith Greenberg told The Blaze that the city said he was permitted to fly the American flag outside the store, but prohibited from displaying anything else outside his business, which specializes in selling knives. "This is a shock," he said. "I feel like this is Russia. I've been around the world, and this is what you expect in really closed countries where there is no freedom of expression. Not here. So it's shocking. This is a shock. Honestly, I feel like this is Russia." Share. The flying of the flag appears to be prohibited under City Ordinance Section 110-131. Greenberg told The Blaze he faces being fined up to $250 to $500 per day if he does not comply. He said potential fines would be devastating to his young small business, which he opened in May. "The city of Ocala is demanding I take this down," he told The Blaze. Greenberg posted a video to YouTube, which is on this link here, earlier this month, trying to raise awareness of the move being made by the city. "We find ourselves in a sad place where local municipalities are stepping all over people's freedoms with the signing of a pen," he said. Greenberg told The Blaze he was even more perplexed by the city's demands because he has spotted other flags being flown at nearby establishments. The photographs forwarded to The Blaze show an Ocala car dealership flying the Mexican flag and an Irish bar displaying the Irish flag. It was not clear whether or not the city has also issued notice to others' businesses. City Code Enforcement Office could not immediately be reached Monday night for comment by The Blaze. The small business owner said his next move will be addressed at the city council at their next meeting. I say, get them good, please. And I'm reading it right here. It's from Unicode to be exact. I'm going to add these to the links. Okay, so this is from the city of Ocala's ordinance, and it is here, section 110-131, prohibited signs. And it says here, it shall be unlawful to erect or maintain any of the following. When you go down to subsection 8, outside pennants, banners, balloons, flags, or streamers, excepted as otherwise allowed in this chapter. So when we go back to the chapter, I'm just going to click it back a couple times. Boom. It'll be under Article 1, if I'm correct. General. Alright. And we'll go to definitions, which is section 110-3, entitled Definitions. Now we'll put these links up so it won't be, so you guys know what you're doing, understand. And we will go under flags, okay? And this is interesting. Flag means any cloth, paper, fabric, plastic, or similar material, usually rectangular in shape, whether or not the material displays characters, ornamentation, or letters attached to any staff, cord, building, or other structure that hangs loosely for the primary purpose of attracting attention to its site. The official flags of the United States and the state are exempt from the provision of this chapter. Okay, so you can fly the U.S. flag and the state of Florida. That's what they say in the state they're exempt. I just find this totally hilarious because there's other flags out there, and what is that? Because people are going to get offended by it? Give me a break. I find this as a cash revenuing scheme, okay? A deception. I don't know why they want to punish people for putting certain flags up for their business. Give me a break. You know, it's I just have to laugh. I find it totally pathetic. And what was so funny about it, I did wrote a letter to the mayor and asking him about how come you can be violating Article 1, Section 2 and 4 of the state constitution. 2 is natural born rights or basic rights, and 4, which is free speech. Okay, and it can be breaching their oath of office under Article 2, Section 5 of the Florida Constitution as well, which is main idea is that they have to protect and defend both U.S. and Florida constitutions on the best of their ability on the position they're going to be entering. So I see that this whole thing totally irrelevant, and that's more of a cash revenue scheme. And they want to have these little code enforcers come out, the deputies of Nottingham. Oh, you got to make money for the city because we may be going broke. You know what? Give me a break. I'm about to chat with this gentleman on it, and what you can do in the state of Florida, you can recall the local servants. Okay, you cannot do it on a state level, but on a local level. And I recommend him to look at just type that up, recalling local servants in Florida. It being certain statutes, I don't have it in my top of my head, but I do find it totally ridiculous, you know. So I'm just letting you guys know what's happening. It's just like more garbage for your politicians. All right, next one here. This came out too, September 9th. By Kevin Gastola from the Dissenter. It's entitled Pentagon DHS Department of Homeland Security award grants to police without considering if agencies have record of violating rights. All right, let's just check this out. It says here, as it reads, a United States Senate committee held a hearing in the aftermath of what happened with the militarized policing in Ferguson, Missouri, in order to examine federal grant programs for state and local law enforcement. At the hearing, the two heads of three major grant programs admitted they do not examine whether a local law enforcement organization is under investigation for depriving citizens of their constitutional rights before awarding grants, which may be included military-grade equipment. The Pentagon has a 1033 program which gives away surplus military equipment to state and local law enforcement for free. Hey, tax dollars at work, America. The Homeland Security Department has a Homeland Security Preparedness Grant Program that is run through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is known as FEMA. And the U.S. Justice Department has a grant program called the Ernie Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant JAG program, called JAG, alright, which makes the acquisition of certain equipment possible for law enforcement. Yet, until what happened in Ferguson, the individuals or departments with a level of responsibility for these programs, Alan Estevez, Principal Deputy under the Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, Brian Camoe, Assistant Administrator for Grant Programs at FEMA, and Carol Mason, Assistant Attorney at the Office of Justice Programs, have not ever met with each other. Estevez, Camoe, and Mason were each witnesses at the hearing, and the Wisconsin Democratic Senate Tammy Baldwin asked them what is the nature of the consultation between the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice on the program, and there is a discussion of whether a law enforcement agency is under investigation for the possible deprivation of constitutional rights. Initially, Estevez tried to deflect the question by saying that the consultation with the Department of Justice Department was one area where the Pentagon needed to do a better job. Baldwin repeated the question, and Estevez said no. The Pentagon doesn't consider whether a law enforcement organization is under investigation before awarding grants. Baldwin asked if there was any reason why this could be considered in the future. Estevez replied, one, of course, it could be, as if all Congress had to do was ask and the Pentagon would gladly oblige. Camoe answered, no, we don't take into any account whether a law enforcement organization is under investigation for the potential deprivation of civil rights and civil liberties. Mason said the one Office of Justice Programs has a civil rights office, make sure that all of the grants programs for the department comply with civil rights laws. Also stated that this office coordinates with the programs offices when they were doing investigations. Any policy to track usage data of any kind, equipment that's considered military grade. Missouri Democratic leader Claire McCaskill asked. Estevez said the Pentagon program did not. Kenoe said the DHS program did not. Mason suggested that some kind of activity reports are available for assessing use of equipment. McCaskill demanded the Justice Department provide usage data on camouflage uniforms, helmets, weapons, all the things used in Ferguson. Later, she indicated she did not think the Justice Department had any idea how their equipment provided to law enforcement was being used, so she was possibly confident Mason was bluffing and made a demand not let her get away with it. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul said in FEMA authorized equipment list, there's actually written descriptions for how equipment should be used, and says specifically not to be used for riot suppression. Kenoe confirmed that was accurate. Categories of personal protective equipment such as helmets, ear and eye protection, ballistics, they were not to be used for riot suppression. When Paul asked what he would be doing about it, Kenoe said he would follow the Justice Department's lead as they reviewed what happened with the police and work with the state of Missouri to figure out what grant-funded equipment was used, then go from there. Good grief. Paul cited an NPR report that showed 12,000 bayonets have been provided to law enforcement by the Pentagon. What purpose are bayonets being given out for? Paul asked. I can't answer what a local police force would need a bayonet for, Estevez replied. I can't give you an answer. None. Paul interjected. So what is President Barack Obama's position on whether police should have 12,000 bayonets? Estevez will not provide anything concrete about whether Obama will be approving the continued handing out of bayonets to local police forces. In the back and forth, Estevez claimed that is the states that decided what they need. But Paul countered that it was his understanding that he has the ability in his position to decide what equipment is given out and not given out. McCaskill highlighted data from the Pentagon that indicates in the last 3 years, 624 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, or MRAPs, MRAPs, have been provided to the state, local law enforcement, seemingly without regard to need or size of the agency. At least 13 law enforcement agencies with fewer than 10 full-time officers received an MRAP in the last 3 years. McCaskill stated the number of MRAPs in the possession of police departments in the U.S. is now higher than the number in the possession of the National Guard. In Texas, local law enforcement has 73 MRAPs. National Guard has 6. Florida has 45 MRAPs. The National Guard has 0. Wow. McCaskill said she questioned whether police need more than the nation's National Guard. She was also concerned that, according to the Defense Logistic Agency, 36% of the equipment given to law enforcement is brand new. Paul was one of the few senators to connect what witnessed in Ferguson to the war on drugs. He expressed concern about SWAT teams engaged in no-knock raids, and in particular a raid in Georgia where a baby was critically injured when he was hit by a flashbang grenade that landed in his crib. Both Paul and McCaskill spoke rather openly about the risk of police militarization posed to dissent. Paul declared, confronting protesters with armored personnel carriers is thoroughly un-American. Militarized policing tactics are not consistent with the peaceful exercise of First Amendment rights for free speech and assembly. These lawful, peaceful protesters on that Wednesday afternoon in Ferguson, Missouri, did not deserve to be treated like enemy combatants. McHale stated when the hearing began, despite the valuable questions and statements made by senators during the committee hearing, it is worth making one quick note that the lack of accountability would have not been so starkly profound if Congress had shown any level of concern or interest in how this equipment was used by police prior to what the world witnessed in Ferguson. And let's check this out here. For more on police militarization, here is a video produced by Brady Films, which concludes some salient examples and how this became all out of control. Let me just check this out for a moment. I'm going to put this back. Hold on here. Alright, let's see how it comes out. I'll do it one more time here. Hold on. Try to bring it up just a little bit. Do it one more time.
In Ferguson, Missouri, unarmed black teenager shot by a white cop. A peaceful protest quickly evolved
between protesters and police in riot gear.
A small army on the street dressed in military-grade body armor, carrying assault rifles, rolling around in armored vehicles. It's completely excessive.
Ferguson, Missouri. Population 21,000. Why in the world do their police look like this? Why are they driving a $300,000 armored vehicle through the suburbs? And it's not just Ferguson. Police are being militarized all over the country. Does Keene, New Hampshire, population 23,000, also need that ballistic engineered armored response counterattack truck? How about Coleman County, Alabama, population 14,000? They need a fine ambush protecting the vehicle. Does Montgomery County, Texas Sheriff's Department need a $300,000 drone? Why do the Fargo, North Dakota police look more like soldiers fighting overseas? How did local police all over America become hostile military forces? Because the federal government has been spending billions of dollars making them.
Nicely done. I have to agree. Too much centralization is really has really affected our Bill of Rights culture, which I've read before mentioned. And another thing too, like I always stress, recommend everyone to read Federalist Papers 46 by James Madison. I do have it in my past archives, so you don't have to really listen to the show. I do narrate it, but or transcribe it. And what you can do, you can read the actual article, the link. So I I say I have my differences with Rand Paul at times, and I know people. It's not like his father Ron Paul, but at least he asked those legitimate questions. I will give him homage for that, but doesn't mean I'm going to be his buddy. The whole thing is, we got to do a 10th Amendment stance. Our tax dollars are being invested tyrannically, and they want us to bow down to them. What Jefferson said, when the people fear the government, it's tyranny. When the government fears people, that's freedom. We gotta let them know, put the fear into them, so we could have a more freer society to enhance humanity. And we could probably spread this message to all my followers around the world, to all my brothers and sisters, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm gonna hit this next article here. We'll show you a little positive here from the Voice of Liberty, and which is powered by Ron Paul channel. And this was written by Elliot Engstrom, and actually came out in August, so it's pretty cool. It says here, 5 ways to be an activist for liberty. Here at Young Americans for Liberty, we're all about activism. Have the right ideas is important. That's the whole reason organizations like the Institute for Humane Studies and the Cato Institute exist. But good ideas mean nothing if they're not complemented by effective activism. So if you're looking to become an active and spreading the message of liberty, here are 5 ways to do so. 1. Join with other liberty activists. There is something to be said for strength in numbers. Joining with other activists at your school or in your community is the first thing you should do in order to more effectively spread your message. One way is to join a chapter of Young Americans for Liberty. We have 500 chapters as many schools around the country, and we're starting more all the time. You must consider joining our sister organization Campaign for Liberty, or attending events like CPAC or LPAC to make the new connections. 2. Openly celebrate the the Constitution. In the United States, we celebrate all sorts of holidays, Labor Day, Columbus Day, President's Day, etc. But what about Constitution Day on September 17th? Shouldn't that be just as a big deal? We think so, and that's why we at y'all celebrate an entire Constitution Week. During the week of September 15th to the 19th, we strongly encourage all of our members and friends to pass out pockets constitutions and engage fellow citizens in discussion about our founding document. And remember, we're not saying that the Constitution is a perfect document. It's not. Rather, we are saying that the Constitution placed specific limitations on reach of government, and these limitations have helped our nation become the freest and most prosperous in human history. Win your audience, not just your argument. Our ultimate goal as libertarian activists is to bring a larger segment of our society over to our point of view, and there's evidence that we're doing exactly that. It's true that involves convincing people of the merit of our arguments. However, we do not win hearts and minds by berating people for every disagreement they have with libertarianism. For example, don't immediately call someone a statist for supporting taxpayer-funded roads. Rather, try to find common ground. Most people don't like things like war, excessive government spending, over-criminalization, etc. Show them that you agree with their ends, and then demonstrate why a system of limited government is better means to achieve these ends than an expansive state system. And always make sure that you treat others and their opinions with respect. 4. Work or volunteer in the liberty movement. Obviously, this is not something that everyone can do, but if you want to get involved with an organization in the liberty movement, there are many opportunities. Campaign for Liberty is always looking for new volunteers, as are countless political campaigns around the country. There are also many opportunities in the liberty movement. For example, we at Young Liberties for America are always posting the best and latest postings at our job pages, ranging from nonprofits to campaign to congressional offices. Another great place to look is libertyguide.com. 5. Build coalitions. You are hardly ever going to meet anyone who agrees with you on everything, even at WYAL national office. I have many disagreements with my co-workers on things like politics, religion, philosophy, etc. But we agree where it counts, and we harness that agreement to work together towards a freer society. And there's a video for that too, when Glenn Greenwald addresses the 2014 Young Americans for Liberty national meeting. And it says here, you might even seek allies with whom you have very limited areas of agreement. For example, we had Glenn Greenwald deliver the video address to our 2014 National Convention. Greenwald is by no means a libertarian on every single issue. However, he and YAL share many views on civil liberties and the importance of privacy, among other things. Isn't it better to work together against the truth of government than to bicker amongst ourselves while government continues to expand? Haha, yep. These are just a few ways that you can become an activist for liberty. Have more ideas or critiques of my points? Leave a comment below. Yeah, I can go on here forever, but it is a good little thing to do, because the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter what your views are. People gotta start uniting on common interests. I have people too I chat with. We have different political spectrums, but we'd be surprised, but we have a lot in common, and as long as you do it with love and finesse. When I have my discussions, I'm not here to say I'm right, you're wrong, you're the a-hole. That's unacceptable, irrelevant, and you'll be tarnishing your own credibility. Always use a finesse and facts. Always have your merits laid out with information. Good. That's why it's great about social media, because it may have its cons, but a great thing about it, you have the opportunity to share a lot of great stuff. On my Facebook page, I got people from different viewpoints. We're sharing information. I probably use my Facebook page not as a diary, but as a informative platform. And I can say this, I had people give me comments, agree or disagree, but long as you have a good discussion, yeah, man, I'll just put my 2 cents in as well. And you'll be surprised, my friends, whether you're liberal, conservative, I don't call you liberals, but if it doesn't matter what registered voters you are, Democrat, Republicans, Libertarian, Socialist, don't be surprised. All you guys may have a lot in common. And the whole thing is, educate yourselves and each other, because there's a lot of areas you got great talents, I have great talents, and we can share them together and be one cohesive unit. We're gonna have our pitfalls. That's what movement's about. You're gonna have your snakes, your infiltrators, your opportunists. It happens to every movement. Okay, it's across the board. I've observed it pretty damn thoroughly. So the whole thing is common interest, and I'll tell you this, it is successful. And I always recommend it to everybody. When you go out there, do it with love, man. Have fun and be open and be vigilant too, because you never know. You're gonna have a lot of clowns out there as well. Like I'm digressing. Sorry about that. Okay, folks. Next one here came from Ynet News. This came out a few days ago. East Jerusalem riots continue after funeral of Arab teen. This is written by Noam Dabul-Dever and Hassan Shalom. As it reads here, hundreds of people attended the Monday funeral of 16-year-old Mohammed Sinokrat, who died of his wounds sustained during a protest over a week ago in the Wadi Jaz neighborhood of East Jerusalem. His death sparked street violence in the area, and mass rioters threw stones at police during the funeral as well, leading to the arrest of 3. That's pretty contemptuous, man. I'm just gonna, before I make any conclusions, I'm gonna keep going here. The even that wounded and eventually led to the death of Sinokrat occurred on the 31st of August. His family claims that he was killed by rubber bullets fired at his head from short range. The Jerusalem police denied the claims and said that the officers had shot the teen in the leg, causing him to fall and hit his head to bring about his death. According to police, officers rushed forward to arrest Sinokraт, but when they saw that he was wounded, they wrote down his details and ordered an ambulance on the scene. I go a little further here. There's a video of security cameras show violence at the gas station. Documents detailing the incident said that the youth was still conscious, and the ambulance from the Red Crescent rushed him to Moscow Hospital in East Jerusalem, where his condition worsened. Evidence from the field as well as official reports were passed on to investigators. The announcement on Sinokrat's death set off violence as early as Sunday night when dozens of masked rioters came from Ocala to a gas station in the French Hill, where they trashed the store, stole goods, and tried to set the building alight using a Molotov cocktail. The men spilled oil on the road at the entrance to the area and damaged fuel pumps at the gas station under the view of security cameras. Police have not yet arrested any suspects in connection to the incident. I always have one question. Why you want to go loot a person's business? I find that contemptuous and condemning. And for Mohammed Sinokrat, it is disturbing what happened to him. And there's a lot of questions going on with the Israeli police force as well, and military, because there's been I would say a ping pong ball, but too many innocent people could be killed, and it's a real shame. But if you're gonna go around damaging someone's business, you're not more than a bunch of pigs, as far as I'm concerned. I hate using that language, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Okay, and I don't care. Doesn't matter who you are, Israeli, Palestinian, doesn't matter. It's dead wrong. And let's not. Yeah, this may still be forever free, and hopefully East Jerusalem is a lot more peaceful, and they clean up and get some real justice. And I know there's a lot of controversies too with Israel, and I'm not knocking the people of Israel. Their government, I have to question, like governments around the world, including the United States of America. A lot of controversies was going on with them. So, alright, well, hopeful to see what happens in the next few days. So, next one here is from Anti-War blog. The Anti-War blog came out September 10th. Written by Murray Palmer. It's entitled Doing Business the Same Old Way. And it reads here, it was only an item on page 5 of the New York Times about an incident on the Estonian-Russian border. The Estonians charged that one of their officers had been kidnapped or detained. Take your pick. By the Russians who promptly denied the story, the Estonians, empowered by their membership in NATO and Obama's recent visit, are quite aware that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty obliges every member nation to come to their aid if attacked. Far from his nation's voters, who less think and less of him, Obama seems to have given a little Estonia a virtual blank check. When he said that if anyone, meaning Russia, made a move against the Baltic states, Russia would have to fight the U.S. too. That's our president, tough abroad and weak at home. That's a good one. All right. Okay. And as it reads, fortunately, nothing has happened on the border, and at least not yet. But by continually calling every border episode an invasion, as Ukraine does, is designed to get attention on the NATO and Washington, especially since the U.S. pays the major portion of NATO's bill, and nothing can happen without its approval. No wonder Ukraine desperately wants to be included in NATO, and why our perpetually bellicose hawks would like nothing more than to give Putin, no angel he, a good whack and teach Moscow who's the real boss. All this, of course, without calling in American ground troops and scaring Americans at home. As Obama and everyone in Washington, Iraq tainted war party keeps repeating while winking, knowing that no one really believes the fairy tale. That fairy tale should things take a bad turn. Ukraine, bankrupt and corrupt, has become our latest freedom-loving heroes, battling the brutal pro-Russians in its region, while hosting our vice president, CIA director, and superhawks like John McCain. Overlooked are some of the new champions of liberty we've inherited. Tom Parfit, who writes for the conservative British Daily Telegraph, has been on the scene watching Ukrainian militia groups, some of them openly neo-Nazis, in the battle against Eastern Ukraine dissidents. One of them, the Azov Battalion, wrote Parfit, the use of neo-Nazi wolf hook symbols on their banner, and members of the battalion are openly white supremacists or anti-Semites. Azov, by the way, has the official backing of the Kyiv government and is overlooked by all those visiting American officials and politicians who have flocked to Kyiv apparently, but who knows, with Obama's approval. Forgive them, God, for they know not what they do. In fact, that Ukraine has been in Russia's sphere of influence for centuries, and like it or not, it's indefinitely more vital to its national security than it is to the U.S. provoking the nuclear-armed Russian bear by expanding NATO to its borders and trying to integrate Ukraine with the West is risky and dangerous. Provocatively, the U.S. has sent an anti-ballistic missile ship to the Baltic Sea to promote peace. 200 U.S. soldiers are now in Ukraine, 120 Air Force personnel and 6 F-16 fighter planes will participate in another military exercise in Poland. While several U.S. naval ships have been in the Black Sea, ever too close to Odessa, and Russia's Navy is only warm water seaport. The possibility of war is never mentioned. Can you imagine the hysteria and fear-mongering if in Washington Putin dared send 200 Russian soldiers to, say, Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, or Ecuador, and the Russian naval ships were sailing around the Gulf or Mexico or the Caribbean? Like it or not, we have an Obama doctrine. Beyond Europe, he has committed the U.S. to the so-called Pivot Asia, involving closing aerial and naval scrutiny of China, and where the U.S. is bound by treaty to defend Japan should it disputes with China over some rocky uninhabited islands end in the shootout or worse. There are also 25,000 U.S. Marines stationed in Australia for a mission neither explained by the administration nor investigated by our mass media. And then, of course, there's the Middle East, where we should never have intervened, save our appetite for oil in defense of Israel, a nation which can defend itself, given its vast hoard of nuclear weapons, a mastery American politics and intimidation of American presidents, and now, unexpectedly, ISIS has become the code word for the new and endless Middle East war, with this brutish and cruel enemy who hate America and Americans. Regularly, we still hear about regional menaces that it left unchecked supposedly, and regularly threaten U.S. interest and even our mainland. No matter that the U.S. hasn't won a war since 1945, the reliance on military might remain the same. From Reagan to Bush II, it's been used to project American power in Central America, Panama, Kuwait, the Balkans, the Middle East, and even against Grenada, that menacing Caribbean military-industrial power. Eric S. Margolis, an insightful commentator, rarely, if ever seen in our mass media, has posed a central question of our time. Who came down from the mountain and said the U.S. must police the globe from the South China Sea to the jungles of Peru? After losing the wars in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Afghanistan, and Iraq, the U.S. should reconsider its overly militarized foreign policy and exaggerate international pretensions. You can't rule the globe on money borrowed from China and Japan. adding that he who spends on wars everywhere ends up broke, and he who ignores domestic needs for the sake of imperial glory is cruising for a bruising. Poor Barack Obama, everyone seems to want him to do something, subtly reminding him of Munich and the dangers of isolationism. Seeking advice, he recently called together a group of carefully selected foreign policy experts, not a dove among them, such as George Ball, who warned the liberal icon JFK not to mess around in Southeast Asia. But JFK knew better and told him, "George, you're crazier than hell." Ball tried again with LBJ, wanted him to stand down before Vietnam destroyed his presidency, but LBJ was going to be the first president to lose a war and be damned by home front warriors. Failing to stop, Ho would sooner or later have us fight on American soil, or so the old line went and still goes. Naturally, no one asked me, but I would not have invited to the seminar Andrew J. Basvik, a retired Army colonel, Vietnam veteran, academic whose lieutenant son was killed in Iraq, and whose book, Washington Rules, America's Path to Preeminent War, challenges the views of all invited guests and their mantra of their indispensable nations. And I would have also invited Noam Chomsky, who has been prescient about East Timor, Vietnam, Israel, and Palestine at all, and whose presence would have resulted in livid, heated, absolutely necessary debate. Expect nothing very good to happen, as Madeleine Albright, Clinton's former Secretary of State, once says to Colin Powell, "What's the point of having this superb military that you're already talking about if we can't use it? It's a temptation too hard to resist. Doing business the same old way is much easier for the world's policeman." Yeah, that's very, very good. I like what she wrote. I like what Murray wrote. Excellent. I gotta say that. It's making it plain and simple. Gotta be a republic, not an empire. And that's one thing I have to say. Even the writers of the Federalist and Federalist Papers have in common. They don't want to see their nation be an empire. Keep a constitutional republic. So I'm going to end with that segment. And I'll be right back. I'm going to take a little break here.